Okay, we're live.
Yes, let's do this. I think this is episode 13, if I'm not
13,
mistaken.
yes.
Yeah. We are going to talk. This is episode 13, and this episode is named 9. I think
number 9,
yeah. I think that I just thought that was quite
yeah, very confusing.
yeah, it's confusing. But I mean football analysis and stats is sometimes confusing, so it's okay. We're
Yeah.
going to talk about the position number 9 striker in the WSL actually. And
Yes, in the WSL, yeah.
yeah, we might have to mention from the beginning that we chose 3 strikers quite randomly. Not randomly, but you know, when we looked at the top 3 top scorer actually in the WSL, we haven't got the data on Alessia Russo, but we might have to come back to her in another episode later on and just focus on her, because she will be an interesting player ahead of the summer, since she probably is on the move.
Yeah, and also World Cup coming up and
Yeah.
so on. She will be she will be in the squad, I guess. So
Yeah.
Yeah, more to come on the World Cup as well. I have great plans. So yeah, and we have, as Mia said, we have data on Alessia Russo, but in this episode we have chosen to focus on 3 other number 9s. So okay, let's go. I'll switch. Do you want to be? Yeah, we will be on this.
Yeah,
on the
where
side.
do I want to be on the screen?
Yeah. And we will go. So yeah, number 9. Great
different number 9s we are going to show, but they play as.
And we're going to show some
9.
variation into their play role. So when I say number 9, I'm thinking about a position, but I'm also thinking about maybe one characteristic play role as well. Like all strikers are not number 9s, and one of these players I would especially say is what I think of when I think of a number 9. And which of the players are we going to talk about today? It's Khadija Shaw in Manchester City, Rachel Daly in Aston Villa, and Samantha Kerr, or Sam Kerr as most call her, in Chelsea. Yeah, 3 astonishing players. So what do you say?
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting, obviously, because you can see the differences already in your first slide. And I'm gonna share these spiders on Twitter as Jesper go on and explain what we see, because we know it's quite small if you don't look at it in a full screen on a computer.
Yes. So if I start, so all of these are forwards. They're compared with the same players in the Women's Super League, and they're all top performing in their position. But the spiders look a bit different. Khadija Shaw has a pretty similar spider to Sam Kerr if you look at what she's above average. It's just that she's the best in most metrics. She's had a fantastic season, 15 goals scored so far. She has the highest non-penalty expected goals this season. She also contributes with the most shot assists. And with shot assists, we're talking about key passes and assists, all passes that leads to a shot. Touches in the box. She also has the highest amount of expected threat received in every game. She's very good in running the routes, receiving balls in the box, and so on. So she's the one increasing threat the most when receiving the ball in play. And we can continue. Expected threat carries. She is the best striker when it comes to generating value or threat by dribbling, carrying the ball. Sam Kerr down to the right, she has a similar spider, as I said. It's just that her non-penalty expected goals is not as high per 90 as many other strikers. It's just it's way lower than Khadija Shaw, especially, which is quite interesting. And the shot assists are high, touches in the box as well. Also, the non-penalty goals per 90 is way higher than their expected goals. So she has still a pretty good contribution in that sense.
Still a pretty good contribution.
Yeah. Well, we'll look more into that later, actually.
Yeah.
What is interesting, I think, with Rachel Daly, which we will also look into more in later plots, is that she is way more involved in play than the others. The other are more maybe what I would call typical nines that are like an end point in possession, whereas Rachel Daly is more involved in Aston Villa's attack. Her number of passes per game are the highest of all forwards.
Okay, and this is also very interesting because Rachel Daly is playing as a left back in England.
Yeah, exactly.
But she is the goal scorer in her club, which she has been when she was in the NWSL as well. So, but also, do you think, I have to ask you something now, Jesper? Do you think that Rachel Daly could be, not obviously because she also has attributes to add to the playmaking phases in her team, but also because she's not playing in a top team, so she has to do more?
Yeah, it could be so, definitely, that she has to do more. And like, if you have a very good player in your team, or if she's like an obvious star, then it's very normal that you want to involve her in play more. So that could definitely be it. I think if she would play in a better team, she would maybe be allowed to have another role. But in the same way, I still think that it's hard to say. It's more of how you use her. I think she could be used in a similar role in a better team as well, but maybe, I don't know which team in England that would be. It's interesting.
You mean it's quite crowded up there within the top teams already? Yeah.
And one thing
I'm pretty sure that Aston Villa is not sad that she's their player.
No, I don't think so.
No.
And one thing that I also think when you look at these spiders that can be important to have in mind is that they are only compared with forward. We're talking about Women's Super League here. We have 12 teams, and the spiders only comparing with players that have played at least 33% of the season. So there's not that many players that are being compared here. It's maybe, I don't know the exact number, but between 12 and 20 forwards maybe. So if you see here, for example, Sam Kerr, the difference between Sam Kerr and Khadija Shaw in the spider, but this is really Khadija Shaw being number 1 and Sam Kerr being number 3. So the positions are moving a bit more than if we would compare central midfielders in the Women's Super League, where there are more players. So keep that in mind. Okay, I accidentally made a duplicate there, but we go to the avatar spider instead. So I talked about Richard Daly being more involved in play, and her like avatar spider is more complex. Samantha Kerr, when I said that there's one here that's a typical number 9, I was talking about Sam Kerr. The poacher is what's maybe closest to a typical number 9 if we were talking about the role. And someone said on Twitter that it looked like a dagger, and I kind of agree. That also describes a bit what Sam Kerr. She's like a sword for the team that keeps generating chances, and then she's like the end point of possession. So there's no doubt that she's a poacher, and it's similar if we look to the national team or her last season or before that. Manchester City, Khadija Shaw is also a poacher, but she also is a bit of an artist as well and a worker. And I think that's a little bit how Manchester City plays also, that Chelsea and Manchester City had a little bit of a different style of play. We will see that more in later plots, but we talked about that before, with Chelsea maybe being more direct and Manchester City being more of a possession team. Or what would you say, Mia?
Yeah, I would say that's pretty much it. And it's very interesting although, because I think these 3 teams with their 9s, they are getting the best out of them. Like, so even if they play a certain style of play, I think they uses their number 9s to the absolute best that they can get out of they can get out of them.
Yeah, and if we talk about Rachel Daly, she also has these poacher characteristics and could probably be used as in the same way as Khadija Shaw. She would play in another team that we talked about before. But in the ways she's playing in Aston Villa, she's also used as an artist that generates chances for other players, but also a bit as a false nine, that she's dropping more, being more involved in play, and not only being a player that is running deep or being the end point of possession in a box. So she's being used in more ways, which generates this spider. So yes, if we go on to heat maps, we can see also here that Sam Kerr is more centralized to being like in the center of the pitch, mostly like in the final third, outside the penalty area and into it, and central corridor and mostly final third. Khadija Shaw is dropping more, but it's still pretty centered. And she moves around more in possession, while as Rachel Daly she's going out to the left mostly, also out to the right, and she's also, her center is way lower than the others. And we can also see that later in heat maps that she's been acting a bit differently depending on which team they face. And Mia talked about that Aston Villa is not as dominant as Chelsea and Manchester City, and that's some to it, that Aston Villa plays lower in general. If we talk about defensive heat map, it's also, Sam Kerr is also very obvious that she has a clear role in when they are pressing in Chelsea. Khadija Shaw's defensive actions is also more centralized, as Rachel Daly, it's probably been different in different games, or it has been different in different games, but she's dropping lower, doing more defensive actions lower down on the pitch, and she's also has had a lot of responsibilities out to the left as well as central when Aston Villa has been defending.
Yeah, these heat maps are really different.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, it's very different, and even though we could see it in their profiles a little bit, this is like, this is very different.
I agree. So we will now look at pass networks, one of my favorite things. I had a discussion at work today about pass networks, and it's like they can be a bit complex when you look at them the most, but I think that I could spend a lot of time looking at players' pass networks over a season or over several seasons when scouting them, and like what's how has their role changed in between games, or how is the team playing, what are they trying to do. Maybe you've seen like a formation when you watch the game on television, and then you look at like how is the formation really looking in offense. Like it could be that they're playing 4-2-3-1, but when you look at it in possession, it's more of a 2-1-4-1-2 maybe, or something. I think it says a lot about the coach, what they're trying to implement. So I looked at all City's game, and then I chose 3 different to kind of tell like how it's been. And like I would say maybe the most common pass network looks like the one to the left here, where Khadija Shaw is centralized on the pitch. She doesn't have that many passes compared to the other players in Manchester City, so she is acting as a number 9, although she has a lot of like final pass, like shot assists and so on, but she's not she's involved as a number 9 a bit. Then we have some games, like this is a game against, I should remember this, it was Chelsea or Arsenal, like where she hasn't been involved at all almost in possession. And she has been dropping a bit because City has been lower, and she also like tried to be involved in possession, but that the circle is very small here. It also indicates that they haven't, Manchester City in this game hasn't successfully been able to reach her in the final third. Like she has had a lot, like she hasn't really had that many actions in possession.
She's very central though.
Yeah, she's very central.
Yeah,
and that's obvious that her role is very central. And they also have like Lauren Hemp and Chloe Kelly acting, if we talk about avatars, in some way more as classical wingers, that they are supposed to like the outer corridors in the final third. So they are like keeping with, and then they're delivering the ball to Shaw. And yeah, this pass network, I don't know, she was maybe dropping a bit more, and Hemp and Kelly was also going down deep. So they have like that flexibility that she can be used in that way also, because Shaw is that good of a striker. And when you have a striker that is so good at scoring goals, and the other teams know that we can't allow Shaw to have too much ball, and definitely not turn in the right way towards our goal, because then she will score. So they focus a lot of defending on her, like they're trying to mark her. They put a lot of players maybe that should stay close to her, and when she draws that much attention, that opens up space for City to use to play the ball behind to players like Chloe Kelly and Lauren Hemp. And I think that's what we've seen here, where Man City has been playing more direct in that sense because of that, and that's really interesting. That's kind of it's a kind of a normal. Man City is not unique in that sense, but it's kind of smart way to use a striker that will draw a lot of attention, like an alternative tactic.
Yeah, and then with that front three that Manchester City actually have also with Hemp and Kelly, I'm sure Khadija Shaw is very happy to play with them. You can see that in the amount of goals she is scoring also.
Yeah, definitely. And and I talked about system. It's very obvious that Manchester City has this dropping number 6, Hasegawa in this game, Alexandri in this one, and that they push their fullbacks. So it's kind of a 2-1, and then the fullbacks and the other central midfielders. We move on. I can talk about that for ages.
You like your passing networks.
Yeah, I do.
But they are really interesting because you can really see the. I mean, heat maps are good, but seeing how a player is situated compared to their teammates, that's always like, and the connections on the pitch. That's always very interesting.
I agree. So Rachel Daly, there's no network here where she's left fullback.
No.
But what's interesting here is that we have Rachel Daly here. So these are different games. In this game, Gregory has been more of the obvious number 9, maybe because Rachel Daly has drawn attention. They haven't been able to reach her in the same way, but she's been dropping, and that's the same here, where Lehmann has been acting more central and received a lot of balls down deep, and Daly has been dropping and being more active in possession. And also here they're playing Daly as she's been highest up, but it's been more of almost like they've been playing with 2 strikers with Knobs dropping a bit more. So I think it's like it's interesting to see the difference. We can also see how Aston Villa has used Lehmann on 3 different positions in this pattern that works: out to the right, central, deep, and out to the left.
Yeah, that's.
So the one we will see connections later, and one of the most common connections is Daly reaching Daly, or I don't know. Do you pronounce this surname different?
Dali. This is French, Jesper. You should know that. How to pronounce it French. This is Kenza Dali. I'm not sure I'm saying it the right way French, but she's a French national team player.
Yeah, I think I'm just showing my lack of knowledge in just Aston Villa names here. Okay. If we look at Chelsea, Chelsea is they're playing a bit different. We looked at the Champions League or the European top teams, and if you saw that episode, you remember Chelsea and Wolfsburg and Roma being like the most direct teams and playing a different way. And like here is also, I think it was interesting because I thought maybe that I would see more pass networks where Sam Kerr would be like an obvious number 9 and being highest up, but compared to last season, like Guro Reiten was offensive too, but in a lot of games, Guro Reiten has the same like average position as Sam Kerr, which I think is very interesting. And then this is from the fall earlier before Harder's injury, but she's been like where she was the obvious like number 10 delivering the ball further, while as here Frank Kirby or the longer ball from Ingle in this game.
Yeah, and now it's kind of sad that both of them are out injured.
Yeah, I know. And also one thing that I think is interesting here compared to the other teams is that in a lot of Chelsea's pass network, it's not as common to have like a lot of passing connections in between the top offensive players, as if we compare with Manchester City here, with Hemp, Shaw, and Kelly having a lot of connections in possession. And
that's also we've talked about it before, because Chelsea's style of play is quite wide, and they like long passes.
Yeah, and they still connect, but it's a lot more about Lauren James, especially like receiving the ball and then doing her thing with her dribbles and carrying the ball and then doing the last pass. So they're like coming to a finish way faster, and they're not passing as much in the center of the pitch or even further down the pitch as they do in Manchester City. So yeah, I think it's interesting, and you can see sometimes like. Still not in these networks, but if we look again at the defensive heat maps, Sam Kerr also has a very defensive role when it comes to pressing. Okay. Okay, so here's a lot of numbers. Don't be scared about this plot, but I think it's still kind of interesting to see. Like here we have pass metrics over the entire season for Manchester City. And here we have how many receptions, how many received passes per game you have on average. And here you have the amount of passes. And we talked about Shaw being, like she has 13 passes per game on average, which is quite normal for a typical number 9. And she's the player that receives not the most passes, like when it comes to passes, but she's more of an endpoint. So she receives almost 3 times the number of passes that she makes. So in most cases, she goes to a finish or loses the ball, which is not like for a number 9. The assignment is to finish. So or you have to dribble your opponent first and lose the ball. So
you just have to be prepared to get it to score. That's what you're saying. Yeah.
But if we look at expected threat received instead in this red matrix, like how much threat do you actually receive? It's very obvious that Shaw is the receiver when it comes to line-breaking passes and passes that makes a difference in possession. Like she's so dark in compared to the others. Like her numbers is 0.88, and the closest otherwise is Kelly and Coombs and Hemp that I have 1/4 of the value. And the connection that she receives mostly from is Lauren Hemp and Chloe Kelly. Those are the players that
serves her.
Yeah, that serves her, exactly.
Yeah.
If we look at Aston Villa instead, we have a different number for Rachel Daly. So she receives almost twice as many passes per game as Shaw does. And remember that Manchester City has more ball in general. And then she receives around only 3 passes more per game than Shaw, but she makes almost twice as many passes. So like she's more involved in the possession and don't always have the assignment to like go for a finish.
So what you're saying is that she is responsible for not only scoring the goals, but also delivering the balls up to herself to score.
Yeah, and just being part of possession and build up. And you can see that in both the heat map and the pass network from her position.
Yeah.
When it comes to expected threat received, though, she has the highest values, like the darkest color here, the highest value for expected threat received. But it's around 75% of the value of Shaw. And when you look to Christy Hansen and Lehmann, they have, or especially Lehmann, they have a value that is closer to Dali than any other player in City was to Shaw. And all of this that I said with like being part of possession and this is all a part about like when we decide the player roles. That's why she matches more with the false nine and the artist than the others do. Yeah, if we look at Manchester City, it's very close to Shaw in some sense. Like Sam Kerr also does 13 passes per game in average, although she receives more passes, or around the same number, but she has an even higher, like she goes for a finish even often than Shaw does, or like she doesn't pass the ball to another person as many times as Shaw does. So she has an even lower percentage of actually delivering the ball to another person.
Yeah, I mean, these plots, there are a lot of numbers on them, but what you are saying here is that the darker something is on this plot, the better, or just a higher number?
The higher number.
Yeah.
This is more style of play of the entire team. And
Yeah,
this,
okay.
like, I also put them there because these plots will be in our upcoming platform that will be released in a couple of months, and also part of like, and these are very nice if you're like an analytic nerd working for a team.
Yeah.
We also generate these plots without numbers that we maybe for coaches that are not interested in numbers per se. But Sam Kerr has a little bit lower expected threat received than Shaw that we saw in the Spiders before, but it's still like very obvious that she has the clearly highest amount in Chelsea, and the players that are most responsible or have had the highest average in delivering was Harder. She's injured now, unfortunately. Otherwise, it's Reiten that is like clear number 2, and her values probably increased since Harder got injured, just because Harder can't do that anymore.
No.
And then it's quite even behind that with Britton Conrad, Sankovic, or Kirby, or whoever is playing.
Do you think that you could, if you dive deep into a plot like this, that you can see who's taken, like the plan from the beginning was that Pernille Harder and Frank Kirby was going to deliver balls up front to Sam Kerr? This is an easy way of explaining it, you know what I mean, but do you think we can see that who has taken on that role?
Yeah, definitely. Like that was like summed up over the season. But if I would do one for every game Chelsea has played, that would be like an excellent. I could definitely dig into that and see how it has been divided, and it would be a great article or something. So
yeah,
we can keep that in mind. So you can definitely draw those conclusions. But when you have an average heat map over the season, it's harder to see what the trend was. But it was still really obvious that when Harder played, she was one of her main assignments was like doing her thing, dribble her opponent and deliver the ball to Kerr.
Now we see that Lauren James have been doing a lot of that, but she is playing as a right winger more.
Yeah, exactly, and not as a number 10 or queen over zone 14 as we wrote.
Yeah, exactly.
But if we look at here, these are just progressive actions, and we don't need to like go into much details, but what is interesting here is that Shaw especially, but also Kerr, they have a mixture of like, they have less progressive actions than Daly, but they are very divided in between carries and passes, while as Rachel Daly's progressive actions are mostly passes.
Yeah, that's quite clear looking at this.
So, and I think that comes from also that Kerr and Shaw are receiving more deep balls, like behind a defensive line or in a corridor than Daly is. But yeah, it's an assumption from me. Also, it's also about their qualities, of course. Yes, when we talk about receiving the ball, this could be quite hard to look at, but one thing that is very clear is that Khadija Shaw is acting in the central corridor. She's acting up and down in the central corridor. Like you said, she was very centered in the pass network. You can see it here that she's receiving mostly in the central corridor and the inner corridors.
For sure, that's very, if you look at it that way, then it becomes very clear. But that's like also the thing that you can build up your your take from the heat map to the passing network, and then like a plot like this that looks kind of messy, but when you have seen the other two visuals, then you could read this quite well also.
Yeah, exactly. And they kind of tell the same story, and you get like a more understanding maybe of the plot when you're doing it in that way. Rachel Daly, she's receiving ball like lower down and all over the pitch, and it's been like from game to game that some games she's been acting maybe more to the right, some games she's more all over it, as you saw in the past networks. While as Sam Kerr, she's receiving ball mostly in the final third. Like she's not receiving, and we saw that in the heat map that it was very centered in the final third, and you can see that here that it's mostly central in the final third, but she's also has a higher percentage of receptions like in the inner corridors or even in the outer corridor than Khadija Shaw. So Khadija Shaw isn't running routes down deep to the outer corridors and receiving the ball, really. Like that's the assignment of Hemp and Chloe Kelly.
I mean, it would be interesting actually seeing how different these three teams use their number 9s, how much they run during a game.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think that Shaw and Kerr would have more like top runs, or what do you say, like when you run at your maximum, while as Daly is covering more space.
Yeah. Exactly. Also, I mean, not just the distance of running. I mean, the max speed, like you said. How many of those runs does Daly do compared to the other two?
Yeah. When it comes to key passes, they have a similar amount. Shaw was top, like she has the most shot assists, and when it compared to 90, she was performing the best. So there, like the amount has been quite similar. Per 90, Shaw is like number 1. She also has the highest amount. These are so few, I put them here, but I don't think that necessarily we have too much to talk about here. But like they're all contributing still to delivering the final pass, all of them, and that's not necessarily the case of number 9s. Shot maps, maybe what you think about most when you think about strikers, and they're kind of messy. Like there's a lot of shots here. It's over an entire season. We have like
we would be worried if there wasn't a mess in these shot maps, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
They're there to just score goals and take shots. So
exactly. And what we can see is that Khadija Shaw has a very high number of expected goals, really, like 13.49. It's very high compared to the others. And I don't know if this is like one of the problems with Chelsea, and maybe the case due to the fact of Pernilla Harder, but I think Samantha Kerr's expected goals number is quite low, and it's like lower than last season, for example. So they're like not putting her
maybe
in
she's
chances.
Just showing that she's human this season, actually.
Yeah, and also like this number doesn't necessarily need to be her problem. Like it's also up to her teammates to deliver the ball to her in good areas. So like it could be the case of like having that the chance creators behind her is not performing as well as last year. But yeah, and also I think Khadija Shaw is like she's finishing closer to goal on average than the others. We can see that Sam Kerr is not really shooting from a distance, and when she does, it doesn't hit target this season. Where I sounded so brutal when I said that.
Yeah, really.
It wasn't meant to be a roast. But I think it's quite interesting that Rachel Daly, like she has scored a lot of goals, but she also has a very good ratio on like shooting on target, which I think is quite fascinating. So she's a good finisher.
Yeah.
Yes. So this plot I put here, I like it, but Playmaker TV is a perfect forum to just like test plots. And what do we see here? So we see I've developed a Playmaker grade that based on the actions that and the data we collect for every game, the player is given a value, an action value per 90, based on a machine learning model that we have. And then it compares that value to other players in the same position historically from a large amount of games in women's football. And then it puts a grade on the player. So if you have 10.0, it's the best performance ever by a forward. And if you have like close to 0, it's a lower value.
What are you going to name this graph now? Because I need to put it on in the thread below this episode. So what are we going to call this graph?
I don't know, grade per game.
Grade per game, yeah.
And one thing I think it's important to say, like just with number 9s, their grades is like fluctuating more per game, and that's because like if it doesn't necessarily need to be because of them, but we saw in a pass network that Khadija Shaw didn't really have any balls, she didn't receive any, and then it's quite normal that a striker, if they don't have the chance to be part of the play, they get a very low grade because they haven't really been involved. While as a central midfielder, their grade is not fluctuating the most, but there's a lack like that it's hard to grade a forward if they're not doing any actions really. And if you have like one shot and you miss it, you usually get a low grade. But what I think is interesting is that except from 3 games when it doesn't seem that Manchester City has really been successful in like getting Shaw involved in the game, she's been performing over average. Like she's had a grade that's been from 8 and above. So she's been having like a top 20% performance of historical games in 70% of her games, which is like very interesting. And that comes from her obviously generating a lot of expected goals, shot assists, and mostly scoring goals. And what I like about these plots is that if you plot an entire season, sometimes you can see if a player is in form or is having a bit of a rough patch. I don't know, in this with these players, it's going a bit up and down. Khadija Shaw has been like mostly good in like keeping a even form, while as you can see that Sam Kerr this season has had more of like being in a good period for 1 or 2 games, then having like a tough game, and then having a good game, except from here where she had like 4 good games in a row. When she's not involved, like, and these games when she has a low grade, the problem is maybe that she's not involved that much, or that Chelsea has to get her involved more.
You know what would be interesting?
No.
Like, I mean, since these players are all national team players, to see if these grades actually has something to do with the international breaks.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
of the fact that when you come back and you have like jet lag and something, and then you still play a game, I mean, it's a too small sample, obviously, but it would be interesting to see like 3 seasons and then say, okay, between these dates, it was an international break, and then they come back to play, and this was the game they played after. I don't know.
And I totally agree. Very interesting. And these grades per game, that's also what comes to the final grade. So the final grade is like an average over the entire season. And I like basing a player grade more in that sense, because if you take all stats of the entire season and make a grade, it could be like quite the same, but it doesn't, like, it could be that the players had like 3 amazing games that's like contributes to a lot of her total grade, but then on average the player hasn't been as good, or hasn't been top performing in that many games. So when you get an average like this, and also that except from plotting the grade, we can also see like how much is the grade fluctuating on average. Is this a player that is performing like on the same level quite much? This is like a player that coaches could be like, always know what I get from this player. Like, this player is when I put her on the pitch, I know what I get from her. I know what kind of performance. We can actually measure that. That's kind of cool, right? And,
that's very cool.
And this is a player that performs really well in some games and is performing worse in others. And if like we would have I don't have the Hoover data here, but if I would have the Hoover data on on my computer and like see like this was against Liverpool, this was against Arsenal, you can maybe draw other conclusion like, okay, this player is performing very good against teams that are further down the table than us. But when we're playing top teams, she's not performing as high. Or
yeah,
the
that's
opposite.
very interesting, because
Yeah.
also that's what you said before. That's not just because the player is bad necessarily. It could say that if you start to look at, okay, but how many passes does the striker receives from her teammates when
Yeah,
they play
exactly.
top teams compared to when they play teams that are lower in the table than themselves.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting.
Or you could see patterns maybe after national breaks or on a rainy day in Stoke on a Tuesday. I was kidding.
Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, how well do you play when it's cold weather? Okay, this game was like -5 degrees, and this game is very rainy. But these two games, very sunny.
Yeah, and you can also like maybe sometimes it can also be that a player is not performing the best among teams that are like on the lower part of the table, and maybe that's from motivation. Like, how can we work with like maybe this player is really performing the best when we have good games, when it's a derby or we're playing a rival or something or another top team, because then it's it's really the player is really excited and. But when we're playing a team that is further down, maybe it doesn't get focused enough. Like, could you draw that conclusions? Could you work with these plots with a player and like discuss that? So I think they bring a lot of value.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have this one later. Like, this is a plot with way more KPIs, and I had this in the end just to say like maybe we need to like. I haven't been showing everything, so we can draw some extra conclusions. But really, we have Daly in blue, we have Shaw in red, and Kerr in black. And one thing that you can see is that when it comes to carries, for example, we already talked about that. Daly is not really the top performer. You can see that Samantha Kerr has a very high challenge percentage, but she's maybe not the one that is doing the most tackles, but she's very successful in that sense. What can we say more? Shaw has a very strong passing percentage when she's actually doing passes. Yeah, all of them are very successful in the air.
Well, this is also interesting because I know obviously many of the plots that we show during these episodes, they are quite, you need context to them. But the thing is also with some of them, like you can say that, okay, but this is because Chelsea is playing like this, and this is because Manchester City has Hemp and Kelly on the wings. But this is why Rachel Daly looks like she is all over the pitch when playing for Aston Villa. So if you watch the teams play, you could also see, I'm sure you could see many things that we have showed on the plots as well.
Yeah.
But we need to we need to tell people looking at this that you always need context to the data and like you said at the beginning, the data we show it's only compared to other strikers or forwards in the Women's Super League, and that's not a big sample as well. So
yeah. And what do you say about putting into context? That's the key. Like, I love spiders. I love sharing them. I love talking about them. But when you look at a spider, it could be easy that just like because a player is having a low value or is like close to the center, that to think that the player is not maybe performing the best in that metrics or is not doing that metric good. I can hear it on television when they have spiders, or when people are sharing them on Twitter. But you have to remember that the spider is also presenting a lot about the player role, and that's why we have the avatars. Like, how is the player used? And also, like, when you're scouting a players that you use spiders from several seasons, or maybe compare national team to the other team, like use them together with other plots. So like this player is not performing that good in passes, but how involved is the player? What can a pass network tell us, or what can a complex matrix with a lot of number tell us? So
yeah, and also the fact is that Rachel Daly's spider shows. Does it show us that she is a good passer, or just that she needs to be a good passer to play in Aston Villa?
Yeah.
So this is we can't be aware enough when it comes to plots and graphics and visuals like this.
It was a general manager in NBA that said that data is great if you ask it the right questions, and that's really like to use data in the best way and to be competitive by using data, you have to use to ask the right questions, and that's what we hope at Playmaker, that we can like help our clients to ask the right questions and educate people in using data and asking the right questions to get the right answers, and that leads
you just did this perfectly now, Jesper, because I was going to ask you who is the best striker. We actually, I just spontaneously, I did a poll on Twitter. Like we got 125 votes.
Yeah.
And from that, and the question was, who is your striker? And I'm gonna tell you the result now from that poll, if I can move down to find. So 175 votes. Final result is that Sam Kerr got 57.1% of the votes. Then we have Khadija Shaw in Manchester City with 22.3%. And Rachel Daly, Aston Villa, 6.9%. And I had an option with other, and other is 13.7%. But Jesper, who is the best striker?
Yes, we will look at
according to the data.
Yeah, according to the data this season, it's Khadija Shaw. We saw that a little bit in the grade per game, that she had a very high performance. And we can also see it here that Khadija Shaw is having the best grade. Rachel Daly is second. So you could say that, I would say that Khadija Shaw this season is the best classic number 9, while as Rachel Daly is the best artist or false 9. Then like when it comes to performance, or it becomes maybe more theoretical or more philosophical, I love Sam Kerr. She's a great player. She will maybe be top of the list next season, or like she will be the best number 9 in the World Cup this summer. We'll see. But I think, this list is also kind of interesting when you look at grades. We didn't talk about Katie Stengel in Liverpool, for example. That's doing very great, according to our stats. Alessia Russo has a very high expected goals per 90, like the second highest of all these strikers. I love Alessia Russo. She's doing great, but if we look at these numbers, we could see that Alessia Russo could score more goals.
Yeah, and the thing is that Khadija Shaw and Rachel Daly have played 15 games.
Yeah.
Alessia Russo have played 13 games, and Sam Kerr has played 14 games.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a bit different, but quite similar.
Yeah, and I would say like that how many games you have played doesn't affect the grade, although like it affects in that sense that if you're playing more, it's harder to like keep a high average and like performing well over time. So
yeah, but it's quite sick that Khadija Shaw has played 15 games and scored 15 goals.
Yeah, that's insane. What's the record for goals scored in Women's Super League? Do you know that?
Don't ask me that question.
Okay, Twitter can answer it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and I think if we're talking about Swedish players, like Stina Blackstenius is a very good player, like over several seasons to like score similar to her expected goals. Although I could say that like her expected goals is a bit low at Arsenal compared to like what it's been at Häcken or in the Swedish national team. So if she would have been put into more chances, she would maybe be higher up on this list.
Yeah, and it's also quite interesting to see that these players on your top 10, they are all different in player profiles in the column of avatars.
Yeah, they are. It's a broad variation actually, and that's kind of nice. And yeah, and it's also nice to look at. If you look at the avatars over season, I think you could see some difference in some of them, although they're quite robust. But some players change in over season or in different teams.
Yeah, for sure. Well, strikers are always very popular players overall too, because they show off a lot during the season. Because they score the goals or assists. So it's going to be interesting to see where these, if Khadija Shaw keeps this up, like if she still will score a goal per game. It's just 7 rounds to play, so let's see.
Yeah, let's see.
7 more goals.
And yeah, thank you for everyone watching. We will be back in 2 weeks, and then we will talk about something different.
Yes, we're gonna switch to Swedish football because the Swedish season and the Damallsvenskan will start next weekend. So we'll have to catch up on that because we are very excited for the Swedish season to begin again. We have waited all winter while the football has been played all over Europe, but we haven't had any live football here. So, well, Jesper, I'm gonna catch a train now.
Yes, go catch a train.
Yeah, I'm gonna do that. Take care.
Take care.